Today I'm going to talk about the dark side of flavor physics, and by that I mean the mysteries of flavor physics. And we generally associate flavor with food. So here is a picture of different flavors of ice cream, which I'm sure we all want to have now, but we are unable to do so in fear of COVID. Anyway, so let me begin with the mandatory slide in any particle physics talk that you have already heard or will hear in future, and that is the standard model of particle physics. The standard model has been extremely successful in explaining how the different fundamental forces act on the matter particles that we see around us. So we have the up and down type of quarks, the generation of charged leptons, and the neutrinos, which constitute the matter particles of fermions, as we
Uh,
say.
Didi, can you just make it full
Yes,
screen?
I think it is full screen.
Uh,
Wait, I made it in the presentation mode, but wait.
I think that part of your screen is not being shared. If can you stop once, like stop sharing and again when you start
Okay,
sharing,
okay,
it gives you an
okay,
option
okay.
to share the all of desktop or just a screen. So if you share the desktop, then everything gets shared. So I think that option will work.
Okay. Let me see entire screen. Mhm. And now can you see?
yeah.
Is
Great.
it fine?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, thanks. All right. So yes, as I was saying, we have the three generations of up and down type of quarks, the charged and neutral leptons. And the force carriers are the gauge bosons, the gluon, the photon, the Z and W. And with the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, the in a sense, it kind of completed the picture. The model has been experimentally verified and is able to explain all observed phenomena except for a few loopholes, one of which is in the flavor sector, which I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so just like ice creams come in different tastes, flavors, colors, they also come in different shapes and sizes. Similarly, we have different generations of leptons and quarks that I already showed you before, and they all have different masses ranging from sub-eV neutrinos to even a few hundred GeV for the top quark. The quarks additionally come in three colors, as is known, red, green and blue. So that is basically what I mean by flavor physics. So they are the different generations of leptons and quarks with a certain mass hierarchy and a certain hierarchy in the Yukawas. And by that I mean it's coupling with the Higgs. Now, just like in any quantum mechanics problem, you can always kind of choose a certain basis. Say if x and y are my eigenstates, I can always rotate them in a certain way so that my new eigenstates become x prime and y prime, which are a linear superposition of x and y, as shown here. Similarly, we have this kind of a difference in the mass basis and the flavor basis for the leptons, that's the neutrinos. And so when we have to go from the mass basis to the flavor basis, so we use what is called the PMNS matrix to describe this change. And as you can see, the entries are given by, so the size of the entries are given by the relative size of these boxes. I'm not giving you the numbers, but so this entry is the largest, and then this is smaller than this, and so on. So the relative size of the box will give you an idea of the sizes. Similarly, in the quark sector, we have also a mixing between the up and down type of quarks, which is defined by the CK matrix. And there's also a hierarchy observed in that matrix as well, as you can see. So all the diagonal entries are large and they are close to 1. And as you go away from the diagonal, it gets smaller and smaller. So, so that's another point of this flavor physics. Now, why should we at all study the flavor physics? So what's so special? Firstly, there is no definite reason why there should be 3 families or 3 generations of fermions and not more or less. Now, an easy answer to why we need at least 3 generations is because we want to have CP violation in our theory, which is extremely essential for the matter-antimatter asymmetry that we see in our universe. CP is actually, CP violation is there in the standard model, especially in the CK matrix. It's denoted by the phase in the CK matrix. But that is, kind of small by many orders of magnitude than what is actually required to explain the current matter-antimatter asymmetry. And so therefore we need other sources of CP violation. The next reason is, as I have already told you, there's a certain mass hierarchy or a Yukawa, or as I said, the hierarchy in the couplings or the mixing angles. And it all started with, but there is no reason why it is so. Now, scientists have been able to measure all the masses of the fundamental particles in nature, starting from the electron in 1897 to recently, even the neutrinos through the neutrino oscillation experiments. But the question why there is this hierarchy, or who ordered the universe to be so fine-tuned, is a matter of aesthetics of your proposed theory. A more important reason for studying flavor physics is something called the lepton flavor universality violation, which I'm going to talk about in detail in this talk. And what is that? So if you study the gauge interactions of standard model, and by that I mean the interaction of the fermions with the gauge bosons, that's the, say, the photon or the Z or the W, whatever. So if you see the interactions, you will see that, I mean, we all know that the electron, the interaction of the electron with the photon is similar to the interaction of the muon with the photon. So the photon interacts with all these fermions with the same strength. It does not differentiate between the different lepton flavors. However, experimentally, it has been observed that there is a certain level of discrepancy in some observables or measurements involving different lepton flavors, and that is what is popularly known as the flavor anomalies, or more precisely, they are called B physics anomalies, because they are seen in the decays of B mesons. I will come back to this later again, but in details. But before that, let me first discuss what these B mesons are. So the B quark, or the beauty quark, as we know, is the heaviest quark that forms a bound state with a lighter quark. Now, the heaviest quark is the top quark at 173 GeV, but it is not. It does not form any bound state. At least we do not know of any bound state involving the top quark. So immediately after that, we have the B, which forms a bound state with all the lighter quarks, and they are called the B mesons. Now, the B mesons have pretty high mass, around 5 GeV, and a long lifetime, and which is why they kind of decay to a large range of final states involving leptons, the pions, kaons, and so on. And so they are called the golden modes of new physics searches, which you will understand in a minute why it's called so. But before that, let me tell you how searches are done. New physics searches are done at particle experiments. One type of search is called the direct search at high energy colliders. Like we all know, at the LHC, the Higgs was discovered a few years back, and how it was you collide two very energetic particle beams and produce a real particle, and from the decay, you kind of uh, you understand what the mother particle was from the decays. For example, in case of the Higgs, it was discovered from its decay to two photons. Now, the black dots are the experimental data here. And if you kind of reconstruct the energies of the two photons, you will see that there's a certain bump here at around 125 GeV. And this bump is due to the resonance decay of Higgs into two photons. So that's how the Higgs was discovered, and its mass was known to be 125 GeV. Now, but there is a limit to how high energies you can reach. I mean, you can go on increasing your energies, but then for that you would also need larger and larger detectors and accelerators. So there's a limit to that. So the other way is to indirectly search for the existence of a new particle in precise low energy experiments. And that is where the B decays play a major role. Now, if you see here, in this plot here, I'm showing the plane of two observables, RD and RD star. I will tell you in detail what these two observables are, but these observables are related to one of the B decays. Now, experimentally, they have been measured, and this red ellipse here is the experimental number, or the correlation between the two. So the many experiments have kind of measured it, and this is the world average. The standard model prediction of these observables, however, is given by this black cross here. Now, if you know that your standard model prediction and your experimental observation are precise, then you know that definitely something is wrong, because your standard model is not able to explain what the experiments are saying, and you cannot deny what the experiments are telling you. Okay, so this discrepancy kind of gives a hint that there is something beyond the standard model which needs to be probed. That gives, the hint of the presence of some new particles. So that's called an indirect search. And both these searches are complementary and are equally important. Okay. So here is a summary of the B decays. Okay. The different types of B decays. One is the decay at tree level or leading order, where a B quark goes to another an up type quark, say a U or a C, an up or a charm quark, and you can have different decays, like it can decay to two leptons and ln mu, or it can also decay to so okay, let me just tell you that the decays are always of the bound state. So the B mesons are decaying because we do not see free quarks, so they are always in the bound state. But when we calculate it in theory, when we kind of draw the Feynman diagram and we calculate it theoretically, it's always written in terms of the quark level transitions, and that's why I have written the B going to a C or U. So it goes, bottom type quark goes to an up type quark, And such decays are known as flavor changing charge current interactions. Why? Because the charges of a bottom and a up type quark, they are different, so it's a charge current interaction. The other type of decay are the flavor changing neutral current interactions. And by neutral, I mean a down type quark goes to another down type quark. So a B can go to an S or a D, and associated with other leptons or neutrinos, whatever. And they are rare. Why? Because they do not occur at the leading order, but they are loop suppressed. So these are the contributing diagrams. This is called the penguin diagram. This is called the box diagram. Now, why this diagram is called a box diagram, I think is pretty obvious from the figure. But can anyone tell me why this is called a penguin diagram? Any guesses? Or if anybody knows? No? Okay. This is because if you draw it in a certain way, it resembles a penguin. Okay. But the real reason behind this name actually goes back to a legendary barroom bet, where back in 1977, famous theoretical physicist John Ellis made a bet with his student Melissa Franklin. So they were playing this game of darts, and Franklin said that if you lose this game, you will have to use the word penguin in your next paper. And Ellis lost the bet. So he had to use this word. But I mean, coincidentally, he found this resemblance later on, that this diagram kind of resembles a penguin. All right. So, why are we so excited about these B meson decays? This is because over the years we have had many experiments dedicated to the study of these B decays. As I show here, the Babar, the Bell, the LHCb, D0 CDF, so on. Especially Babar and Bell are in fact called the B factories because they produce these B mesons in large amounts. And also recently LHCb, which is a detector and part of the LHC, is also looking at these B decays. So we have a lot of experiments. They are taking huge amounts of data, and they have, over the years, they have also kind of become more and more precise. So their uncertainties have reduced. They are taking huge data sets, so statistically it's also very rich. So what are the flavor anomalies or the B physics anomalies that I told you about before? One is something called RK. What is that? It's the ratio of the branching fraction of a B meson going to a K meson, which is a kaon, and two mu's, to the B going to K and two electrons. And at the quark level transition is a B quark going to an S quark, which is a flavor changing neutral current interaction. Similarly, for RK star, it's the decay of B to a K star meson instead of K. Now, I already told you that these, since the flavor changing neutral currents, they are mediated, I mean, in the standard model, they are mediated through these box and penguin diagrams, where the mediators are the gauge bosons. And I already told you that the gauge bosons do not differentiate between the two flavors of the leptons. So therefore, in standard model, we expect this ratio to be 1, and that is what we get. But experimentally, when we measure it, we see that there's a huge discrepancy between the measured and the expected. And that is what the anomaly is. So it's called the RK star anomaly. Similarly, there is this RD star anomaly, which is in the flavor changing charge current interaction, where a B quark goes to a C quark. Basically, it's a decay of B to D meson or D star meson and a tau. And in the denominator, we have either an electron or a muon. And in this case also, we observe a large discrepancy between the two. Now, why do we take these ratios? Because you see, at when we calculate it theoretically, we always calculate it from the quark level transition. But since the decays are actually of the bound states, you need to kind of, there are something called form factors, which are non-perturbative objects, which need to be also included to kind of to include the fact that it's not the decay of a free quark, but a decay of a bound state. And these form factors involve huge uncertainties because they cannot be kind of calculated theoretically. You need to model it, and you don't really know uh, what kind of proper. A lot of theoretical models are there, but then they are not very precise. Recently, due to lattice experiments or lattice measurements, we have obtained these form factors more precisely, but then even now they include errors. So therefore we take ratios, because in the ratio all these uncertainties or the errors kind of cancel out. So theoretically also you get a very clean observable, like you can predict it theoretically very precisely, and in the experiments also you can measure it very accurately. So therefore we take these ratios, and they also kind of give you a test of the lepton flavor universality violation. And because of this deviation, we know that it hints at physics beyond the standard model. Likewise, there is also a large deviation in the magnetic moments of the electron and the muon. And let me tell you that in this case also, both the theory and the experiments have progressed a lot, and we have very accurate measurements. And due to the incorporation of higher order, all these higher order diagrams, uh, and so the standard model, the theoretical prediction is also very precise. Yet there is this discrepancy between the two, and we do not know why. So, but sadly, these are not the only things that we are in the dark about, or are which are so mysterious. The other dark thing has already been discussed by Kostov in his talk 2 weeks before, and if you remember this pizza slice he showed you, when a quarter of the energy budget of the universe is comprised of what we call the dark matter. Apart from the ordinary matter that we see and we know of. And in the standard model, there is no particle physics candidate for this dark matter. Now, what we know and we see and that I talked about so far is this small slice and breadcrumbs here. And as you can see, there is something dark about this piece too. Now, people have always kind of kept these two parts separate. They always try to address one of the issues at a time. But I have been, in my research, I have been trying to kind of connect these two sectors. And so this is what the basic idea of my research is all about. Now, even if you do not understand anything beyond this slide, I hope I have been able to at least convey the idea behind my work. So we understand that we need to go beyond the standard model, and we need a particle physics candidate for dark matter. But how do we do that? Now, a simple example is here. Let's say I add a singlet scalar S to my particle content, I mean that you already know, and then I write down the interaction Lagrangian as shown here. Now, if I have to respect all the symmetries of the standard model gauge theory, we know that it can only interact with the Higgs boson as shown here. So H is the Higgs. Now, if S has to be your dark matter, you have to somehow forbid it from decaying. Because if it decays, then we would not see the relic that is observed today. Okay, so in the early universe, it was in the hot thermal soup where it kind of interacted with the Higgs, but then at present it has kind of frozen out, and so we see the relic, and therefore we need to forbid its decay now. So therefore we do that by imposing a discrete Z2 symmetry under which S goes to minus S, so it's odd under the Z2 while all other known particles are even. You see the Lagrangian that I've written here is also invariant under a Z2, which is why we do not have a S cube type of term which would violate the symmetry. So once you have the dark matter, you write down, you solve the Boltzmann equation and you calculate the relic abundance. And in this plot here, I show you the in the lambda ms plane, this black line here is the fraction of the omega s, or the relic of the singlet, over omega dm, which is observed by the Planck satellite. And this is 1, which means this is the correct relic abundance is given by this black line here. Anything below this is excluded because that would make the ratio greater than 1. Other parts are also included from other experiments. So what we are left with is this small, very narrow region of mass between, say, 52 to 62 GeV or so. So, but we are successful in including a dark matter candidate in our theory. But there are a hell lot of models that does so, but it fails to account for the other mysteries. And similarly, there are a hell lot of other models that explains one or the other anomalies that I talked about, but does not account for the dark matter. So what we did in a recent work is, instead of adding a new particle in an ad hoc manner, we extended the symmetry of the standard model gauge group. So we know that the standard model gauge group is given by the SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, which we have extended with another abelian U1 X gauge group. And the gauge boson corresponding to this gauge group is, say, X, and it couples only to the leptons, and hence the name leptophilic. It couples to the leptons with a strength Gx, and the Ni are the charges of the different generations of the leptons under this gauge group. Now, for your easy comprehension, I've written down the known QED Lagrangian, where mu is the photon stress tensor, and it couples with the fermions with a strength E, which is the electromagnetic coupling or the fine structure constant, and this is also proportional to the charge quantum number. So for the leptons, it's, say, 1, and for the neutrinos, it's 0. So this Lagrangian is kind of similar to this. And also we have a mixing between this gauge boson, the X, and the gauge boson corresponding to the U1Y group, which is the B mu nu. So there's a small kinetic mixing denoted by the parameter epsilon. And epsilon is very, very small, it's much less than 1. Now, the charges that you see here, we do not choose them randomly, but we constrain it from the low energy data, and by that I mean the data in the B2SLL decays or the RK star data that we have, and the muon magnetic moment data. So when we have this Lagrangian, we have additionally these type of diagrams. Again, these are those penguin diagrams that will contribute to these decays. So we add the new contributions due to this gauge boson X, to the standard model and see whether we can explain the discrepancy that is observed. And indeed, we are able to kind of explain the discrepancy. So this is the parameter space of N1 and N2, and the blue points are the denote the region which can satisfy the data, experimental data. And you see there's a negative correlation between them. And from this we can actually, because we need to make a specific choice for these charges, they cannot be random. N1 equal to -1 and N2 equal to 2 is found to be a good choice. As I told you, epsilon, the mixing parameter, is very small, of the order of 10 to the power -4. And we can also obtain the parameter space of the mass of the gauge boson and the coupling strength Gx, which is shown in this plot. We have considered only very low mass between up to 1 GeV, and the lower limit is because we need it to decay to 2 muons. So the threshold is mx is greater than 2 mu, and up to kind of 1 GeV of mass. Now, from the Archaea data, if you remember, it involved only the first 2 generations of the leptons. So it was the ratio of the muons to the electrons, and therefore we could constrain only N1 and N2. And but N3 is like we are free to choose N3 because the data does not constrain N3. So which we chose to be -1. However, there is a small problem here, and that is the gauge invariance, or the word identities if you calculate, rather you can say the current conservation, is spoiled by quantum corrections at loop levels. And these are known as the gauge anomalies or triangle anomalies, due to these type of diagrams. And a model cannot be anomalous, so gauge theory can never be anomalous. So we need to remove this anomaly. In the standard model, now even without this additional U1x gauge group, there will be such non-conservation of currents because we have 3 gauge groups in the standard model itself, and they will also contribute to such triangle diagrams as shown here. However, it is found that in the case of the standard model, the anomalies miraculously cancel, and that is the kind of beauty of the model, which is why it is kind of it's still there. So the current conservation, which is del mu J mu, it is proportional to the trace of the generators of the gauge groups involved, and this has to be 0. Now, in case of standard model, if you calculate it for each of these kind of currents, we obtain exactly 0. So therefore, standard model gauge theory is not anomalous. Now, the moment you add another gauge group, or the theory becomes anomalous, because now these leptons now carry additional charges, so which need to be cancelled. And how do you do that? We do that by adding more fermions with suitable charges. Now, in our case, the anomaly cancellation requirement boils down to basically 2 equations. So the sum of the charges need to be 0, and the sum of their cubes need to be 0. If we can ensure these 2 things, then we are done. Now, the choice that we made, N1 equal to -1, N2 equal to 2, and N3 equal to -1, makes the sum 0, but it does not make the cubes 0, which is why we need to add additional fermions. And when you add additional fermions, say you add one more fermion with charge N4, in the equations it will kind of add up. Plus N4, and in this case will be plus N4 cube, and so on. So what we do is we add 3 heavy right-handed neutrinos with charges also equal to N1, N2, N3. Why equal to them? Because they are right-handed. Now there's a difference between the left and the right-handed, and in the case of the right-handed, there's an additional negative sign that appears in the equation. So if I choose 3 more fermions, say with charges N1 prime, N2 prime, N3 prime, equal to N1, N2, N3, then the equation will boil down to N1 plus N2 plus N3 minus N1 minus N1 prime minus N2 prime minus N3 prime, and so on. So because of that, we choose the charges of the 3 right-handed fermions to be exactly equal to this, which cancels this as well as the cubes. And so we are able to make our theory anomaly free. And the lightest of these right-handed neutrinos can actually act as a suitable dark matter candidate. So you see, we did not kind of begin with just by adding fermions in any ad hoc manner. The fermions arose naturally due to these anomaly cancellation requirement. So, and how do you stabilize the dark matter? Again, you impose a discrete Z2 symmetry, as I told you, to kind of stabilize the dark matter. And yeah, but there are 2 ways in which you can do it. Either you consider all the 3 right-handed neutrinos to be odd under Z2, and in that case the lightest of them will become your dark matter, or you can choose any one of them to be odd, in which case only that will be your single dark matter candidate. Alright, and so from the same gauge theory we can come up with two toy models. Now we also need to give masses to these fermions, which is why we need extra scalars, which are these singlet scalars phi 1 and phi 2. And we also have another, so H1 is the usual Higgs doublet in the standard model, and H2 is another additional Higgs doublet, which we require in order to give masses to the small neutrinos, like the left-handed neutrinos, which are already there in the standard model. Standard model, as I already told you, predicts that these neutrinos are massless, but experimentally it has already been shown that they have very tiny mass. So we need to generate that mass as well, which is why we need this additional Higgs doublet. Hello?
Hello?
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand. Okay, no problem. Yeah. So now that we have a model which can, so we started with the flavor anomalies, and we ended up having also a dark matter candidate in our theory. Now with this, if we proceed with the other phenomenologies, we find that we can actually explain or accommodate a wide range of phenomena in our theory. So as I already told you, we can generate the small neutrino, standard model neutrino masses. So in case of toy model 1, it is given by this one loop diagram. So it occurs at the loop level. We already have incorporated muon magnetic moment, the discrepancy in the muon magnetic moment in our theory. And with this additional diagram shown here, we can also address the anomaly in the electron magnetic moment. We can also address the RD star anomaly via this diagram, and also we can we address some Higgs invisible decays. So we have limits on these decays, and so they be constrained from such diagrams. Now I will not go into the calculations and technical details, because I mean there are so many technical things which I really want to avoid. I just want to give you the idea of it. So the wide range of phenomena that we can address in toy model 1 can also be addressed in case of toy model 2. with the exception of RD star. In case of toy model 2, we cannot, I mean, not both. We can actually explain RD and not RD star, but since there is a certain correlation between the two, explaining one without the other kind of violates that, and so we cannot do that, but the rest we can do. And in this case, the neutrino mass generation mechanism is slightly different. It is not at the loop level, but it's at the tree level, and is this is the famous seesaw mechanism that I think you might have already heard. So with that, I come to the summary. I will not go through all these points again, but the most important point that needs to be mentioned here is that it is not just sufficient to be able to kind of explain a lot of the dark phenomena or mysterious things. I mean, it's not sufficient to just be able to explain the experimental observations without being able to test your model at future experiments. This is the very reason why supersymmetry as a model kind of failed. It was the next best effort after standard model, but then it failed to show up at experiments, which is why scientists, particle physicists lost interest in SUSY. So therefore, we here we do not stop at just explaining the observations, but we also make certain predictions for future experiments. For example, in case of toy model 1, we predicted that if you search for a mono muon, so a single muon plus a missing energy final state in a PP collision at Hadron Collider, like for example, now LHC is in currently undergoing a shutdown for its next upgrade. So at the high luminosity LHC, you can search for this signal because it's absent in the standard model. So it's very specific to this toy model that I told you about. So if you can find such a signature, then it will be a confirmatory test for toy model 1. And if it's not observed, then we can discard the model as well. Now, discarding models is also very important because you have to kind of go on with this procedure and see which one is the correct theory of that explains our understanding of the universe. In case of toy model 2, we predicted the branching fraction of a lepton flavor violating Higgs decay. Now, Higgs generally decays to a pair of electrons or a pair of muons. I mean, the same flavor, it decays to the same flavor. It does not violate the flavor. But in our case, we have flavor violating decays, and so we predicted that. Now, if you do not observe such flavor violating decays, you can rule out the model or you can confirm it. And also there's another very nice 4-lepton final state at PP collider, which you can observe. And the 4 leptons are not just any 4 leptons, but it's specifically 1 tau, 2 muons and 1 electron, or 2 taus, 1 muon and 1 electron. Such signals are again not seen in the standard model, so it will be a very specific test. And also kind of because you see the two models kind of give very discriminatory signatures, so you can discriminate between the two as well. So I will not go into details, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lopamudradi, for the wonderful talk. So for questions,
Thanks.
I'll request everyone to please raise their hands or type their questions in the chat box. I'll read it out for Lopamudradi. Okay. So over to RC sir.
Hi, Lopamudradi, can you hear me?
Hi, sir. Yes.
So nice talk. So I had a question, more general question, which is so you were talking, so in this case, you said that the dark matter naturally arises because of the anomaly related
Yeah,
correction.
yeah,
But
exactly.
I
Yes.
mean, if you are planning to, I mean, when you are, let's say, if someone wants to sort of have a theory of a new dark matter particle, then
Mhm.
one of the things is that, I mean, the main thing about dark matter is that the electromagnetic interaction is very weak. So, I mean,
Right. Yes.
so when you start out to
Mm-hmm.
look for such a particle, like here
Mm-hmm.
you started with a simple, you said, okay, what if I start with this simple particle, I add this to the Lagrangian and so on. So
Yes.
what
Yes. Yes.
exactly do you do in that? I mean, if you want to suppress the electromagnetic interaction, I mean,
So
how do you?
the scalar that I talked about in the simple example, the scalar is neutral, and any neutral particle will not kind of have an electromagnetic interaction. So that's the one thing you do. Charged fermions or charged scalars are generally not considered to be the dark matter. I mean, because you cannot forbid that electromagnetic interaction in that case. So, in case of dark matter, it always has to be a neutral particle. So, therefore, in our case, the right-handed neutrinos that I talked about are also they are neutral particles, which is why they can become a suitable dark matter candidate.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a question in
There,
the
yeah,
yeah,
I just want to mention one more thing.
yeah.
There are recently there have also been some studies with fractional charged dark matter. So people have actually considered charged dark matter, but the charges are very weak, and there are mechanisms to kind of also moderate the electromagnetic interaction. Yeah,
Okay.
just wanted to add that.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat box from Bhuvan Jyoti Bhattacharya. So he asks,
Okay.
can you talk a bit more about LVF in your models? For example, mu to E gamma. How large or small are
Uh,
in your model?
Yeah. I did not actually present any of my kind of results because I wanted to avoid the technical details. But the LFV that I talked about in either of the models, so the basically it comes from this kind of one loop diagrams, and so they are not at the tree level, and so you can kind of it's already suppressed, and the couplings that enter here are chosen such that the current limits that are there on these lepton violating decays are met with. If you want more details, I mean, I don't know if you are expecting more details about that, but uh, we uh, uh, we abide by the current experimental bounds. If that answers your question.
Okay, so uh, are there any other questions you can? Okay, so Shagnikta, please, over to you.
So hi Lupamudradi, thanks for the talk.
Hi,
And
hi. Yeah.
I just had, I think, I don't know much about this, but I had this question. So I have heard people talking about particles like WIMP and those kind of things as dark matter candidates.
Yes, so so WIMPs are basically a class of particles. So it's not a particle like the electron or the muon or so on. So the class of particles with a mass which is in the GeV range or electroweak uh, uh, interaction range, and it couples with, so it's heavy, so which is why it's like called massive, and it interacts weakly, so it's in the interaction strengths are of the order of the electroweak coupling, gauge coupling that we have in case of the standard model. So those are generally classified, those type of particles are known as WIMPs. Now in our case, these right-handed neutrinos that I talked about are also WIMPs, a kind of WIMPs, because they have masses in the GeV range, and the interaction strength is it is observed that if it's the interaction strength is in the electroweak range, then you can satisfy the correct relic abundance. And so yes, these are WIMPs.
I see.
But you can
And
have other kind of particles too, which will be your WIMP. I mean, it's just a class nomenclature. Yeah.
and like in order to detect this kind of particles directly, what kind of experiments, like are these only like
Yes.
collision
No. So
experiments, or can we do some kind of astrophysical
no.
detection or those kind of
Yes,
things?
astrophysical detections are are there, and basically from the cosmology and astrophysics, basically we know that the dark matter exists, but so far it has failed to show up at particle detectors. Even at LHC, even with such huge high energy, we have not observed any dark matter. But there are few specific dark matter experiments at dedicated experiments like the xenon or the lux, which kind of detect it through its, so dark matter can kind of recoil against a nucleus, so they keep a heavy inert nucleus like a xenon in their detector, and they see whether, they just keep it like that, and if the dark matter particles are constantly striking it, then the nucleus will kind of recoil, and from the recoil they kind of because these are neutral particles, does not have electromagnetic interaction, you cannot see them, which is why the name dark. You cannot see them, observe them directly ever. So you always have to infer it from such recoils, and so they measured the recoils of the xenon nucleus, and they could only set an upper limit on the direct detection. Yeah, so far they have only set an upper limit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can see one question by Kaustubh. So Kaustubh, you can go on.
Thank you for such a nice.
Costa, thank you for your slide, that pizza.
So my question is, you made some very clear-cut predictions of the two models. The
Yeah.
predictions that could, in principle, be tested by LHC.
Yes.
So, but the LHC has been running for many years now, and you think that going back to the data and digging it up might already do the trick? Are there findings?
No, so what we predicted was for the high luminosity LHC, because we kind of estimated the number of events that can be seen in such final states, and only because these are very what do I say? I mean, they will not be observed at the current or the past data because the luminosity was very less. So in the future upgrades of LHC, when the luminosity is higher and kind of the data is also taken in large amounts, then there's a probability that you could kind of see few events in these channels.
Have you calculated that? Have you calculated that exact probability of seeing the things and?
Yeah. So
how,
if you go into okay, if you look at my paper, you will find that we have predicted a few numbers for the high luminosity LHC. I mean, the number of events, signal events that can be observed. But then this is just an estimate, because you have to kind of do a detailed background analysis and apply suitable cuts and to kind of extract this signal, because you see LHC is a very messy background. So yeah, we've predicted a few numbers, less than 10 events or so for some of these signals. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shouparno, you can go on.
Thank you, Lopamundaji, for nice talk.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my question was, my question may be pretty naive. So I am asking like why did you consider the Lagrangian, the modified Lagrangian up to s to the power 4? I mean, why was why was it s
Oh,
square
okay,
not enough?
okay.
That part, and
Uh,
secondly, like why the Z2 symmetry? I mean, could you that explain that part? I mean, like why did you take Z2? I mean, why was it
okay, okay.
Type's event? Like why did you consider that?
Okay. Yeah. So, firstly, why s to the power 4 and not s square? Because if you the standard model Lagrangian, and if you do the kind of dimensional analysis, then you will see that the Lagrangian is mass dimension 4. And so you in order to okay, let me go back to that slide. Hmm. Yes, this one. Yeah, so you could have kind of stopped here, but that is another way of saying that my dimension 4 term, or this coupling lambda s, is basically 0. That's another way of looking at it. But then this this term will always be there. I mean, as I said, you have to write down the Lagrangian in a way that it respects all the symmetries and the mass dimensionality and so on. So that's the reason we keep up to dimension 4.
And
And the
yeah, the Z2 symmetry.
next thing why we need a discrete Z2 symmetry is uh, okay. You see, we need to kind of forbid. So basically, as you will see that this is my main interaction term, right? And the Higgs here is not a singlet, it's a doublet. Okay, if I don't know whether in the particle physics you have already read it. So it's a doublet, and if you expand this, then you will get a term like HSS. Okay, now that HSS term is basically will give you a decay of the Higgs to dark matter, which is okay, but it will also give you a SHH kind of term. Okay, now if you expand, now an SHH kind of term means that two Higgses can make up to give you one S or dark matter, or one dark matter can decay to two H's, right? Now, if I have to forbid that decay, I use this discrete Z2 symmetry under which this is odd. Meaning, when S under the Z2, the S goes to minus S. So, in the Lagrangian, the SHH term will go to minus SHH. The term will change its sign, and therefore the Lagrangian will no longer be Z2 symmetry. Okay. So by putting this Z2 symmetry, we kind of forbid that kind of SHH term, because it's Z2 odd. It becomes Z2 odd. We can easily forbid that term, and therefore forbid its decay.
So we basically needed, this dark matter decaying into Higgs being avoided.
Yes. Because if it decays even now, then you will not see the relic that is observed. I mean, initially it can be it was in the thermal soup, and it was going back and forth. But at one point you have to kind of stop that, and for that we need this. And this happens, well, let me tell you, this happens only after electroweak symmetry breaking, okay, not before that. So before that we have all types of terms, and as I said, it can go back and forth. S can decay to 2 Higgs, or Higgs can decay to 2s, and so on. Everything is going on. But after electroweak symmetry breaking, because of this discrete Z2 symmetry, you can forbid that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so Bhubanjyoti Bhattacharya has a comment. So over to him.
Yes. Please.
Hi, Lopamudra. Can you hear me?
Hi. Hi. Yes.
So first of all, let me tell you, I mean, it was a very good talk. I mean, it's very hard to give particle physics talks
Yeah.
at an
Thanks.
introductory
Thanks.
level, right? Because there's so much
Yeah.
things to cover. So it's very good. I
Right.
appreciated your talk. So a couple of comments. The first one that I wanted to make is with your RK number that you presented on slide 9. If you could go back there.
Yeah. Sure. Just a moment. Mm, yeah. This one.
Right. So here, when you quote the standard model number, I'd be a little more careful about how the error bars are coded, because in general, it is known
Um,
now that the errors are, I mean, so initially when people wrote these papers, probably 5-10 years ago,
right.
thought
Right.
about these errors being small, but there
Mm-hmm.
is more, work in the community that shows that these error bars are slightly larger than you've quoted over here.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Okay.
no matter what, I mean, your point is taken that there is a discrepancy. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had another comment on your slide number 14. It's a little
Yes.
bit unclear to me because you wrote x mu and then x mu nu. And
Oh, so
these are
this is
different things,
the
right?
right, right. So this is the stress tensor. Yeah, yeah, yeah. These are different things, but um, yeah, maybe I could have written this as Z prime mu. Yeah.
So your
So where
x
Z
mu is
prime is the
so I'm guessing the x mu
mm,
is the new U1x boson.
U1x boson, and so x mu nu is nothing but del mu x
Okay.
nu minus del nu x mu. Yeah,
So it's
that.
kind of the
that.
B mu nu equivalent of the
Yeah, yeah.
boson.
It be mu equivalent of the right, right. Yes.
Perfect. So that was not clear to me immediately.
Okay, okay.
I have another question sort of related to what you were talking about. I guess Shoporno was asking something and related to that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
this is when you talk about the discrete symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, once you write the discrete symmetry, or
Mm-hmm.
once you write the Lagrangian, it has a discrete
Mm-hmm.
symmetry. It's
Yes.
not entirely clear to me um, how electroweak symmetry breaking would affect it, because electroweak symmetry breaking, all it does is puts a vev in the Higgs, right?
Yes. So
Right. So
you just need to expand it, and
right, but this
yeah.
sure you can
Mm-hmm.
expand it, but from what I understand, your Higgs has no S has no extra structure, right? Because S is a singlet under everything, right?
Ah, well, yes. Here in this case, it does not have a structure, but I
Right.
mean, I just told. I mean, I kind of wanted to explain. I mean, in a simple way, why we kind of have to forbid
Right. So you're saying
or
that in
use that.
general,
Mhm.
in other models, this might be the
In
case.
other model. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fair enough.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so I think there are no more questions. So thank you, Lopamudrati. You can stop sharing
Thanks.
and we'll move
Okay.
to the interaction session. And before that, I'm just doing an announcement of the next talk. So Namrata Di will be giving the next talk, 19th August. There is a change of time for the convenience, and it is 11 a.m. IST. So I'll request everyone to please participate on it. So I'll now hand over the virtual mic to Sagnigda.
Thanks, Ognivo. Within 1 minute, we will have another session with Lopamudradi, which would be an interactive session.